Hey everybody, today I am reading 300 climate change facts, and that's all I'm doing. 300 facts. I made sure to pick sources that I know to be reliable sources. I didn't pick anything on the far political spectrum on the left or the right. I didn't pick any political pundits or talking heads. I put the links to over 50 of the sources that I've used in the description. And these facts are climate change facts, like I said, but they are also climate change adjacent. There's a lot of stuff about recycling in there, wildlife facts, the environment, energy output, and I'm going to do my best to do this top to bottom without cutting. I'm just going to take a quick beat in between each fact. I'm not going to address the fact. One more quick thing, if you don't know what climate change cheddar is, we give 50% of everything that we make away to climate relief efforts. So every subscriber, every time you hit the thumbs up on there, it really helps us out. Thank you very much for watching these videos. This is the perfect video to just put the video on and listen to it, plug it up to a speaker and just listen to it. You don't have to look at my face. Here we go. The average global sea level has risen by 8 inches since 1870. There's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now than there has been in the last 800,000 years. Our climate has accumulated the equivalent of a total of more than 2.8 billion Hiroshima bombs worth of heat since 1998. The golden toad is the first species to go extinct due to climate change. Global warming is breeding swarms of giant mosquitoes in the Arctic. Warmer temperatures are causing these giant bloodsuckers to emerge earlier and grow larger. In 1910, Glacier National Park in Montana had 150 glaciers. Today, there are just 25. Under a high greenhouse gas emissions scenario, it's likely that all but a few polar bear populations will collapse by 2100. And even if moderate emission reduction targets are reached, several populations will still disappear. Sea ice that stays in the Arctic for longer than a year has been declining at a rate of about 13% per decade since satellite records began in the late 1970s. Excuse me. If climate change continues at its current rate, by 2070, much of the world's population is likely to live in climate conditions that are warmer than conditions deemed suitable for human life to flourish. November 2020 was the hottest November on record. Ocean acidity has increased by 30% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This increase is 100 times faster than any change in acidity experienced by marine organisms for at least the last 20 million years. Because sea levels continue to rise in the north, for the first time in hundreds of years, ships are able to travel through the Northwest Passage above North America. 72% of Americans say that they want to reduce the effects of climate change, including a majority in every political party. The proportion of Americans who are either dismissive or doubtful about climate change has decreased to 20%, which is down 5 percentage points from 2014. The production of single-use plastic bottles requires up to 17 million barrels of oil every year. About 90% of the energy used by washing machines goes towards heating the water. Doing laundry in cold water for 1 year could conserve enough energy to drive a car up to 421 miles. Going vegan saves you 3,142 pounds of CO2 a year. The Greenland ice sheet is melting 4 times faster than it was in 2003. Between 1992 and 2017, Greenland and Antarctica have lost 6.4 trillion tons of ice. The tropics lost about 61,000 square miles of forest in 2017, an area the size of Bangladesh. The World Bank estimates that about 3.9 million square miles of forest have been lost since the beginning of the 20th century. In 2018, The Guardian reported that every second, a chunk of forest equivalent to the size of a soccer field is lost. As of August 2019, more than 80,000 fires burned in the Amazon, an increase of almost 80% from 2018. Over the past 25 years, Uganda has lost 63% of its forest cover. Tropical trees alone are estimated to provide about 23% of the climate mitigation that's needed to offset climate change. The Food and Agricultural Organizations of the United Nations says that deforestation is the second leading cause of climate change. Deforestation accounts for nearly 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. Americans alone throw away around 25 billion styrofoam cups every year. Around the world, people litter more than 4.5 trillion cigarette butts every year. Humans today use about 50% more natural resources than we did 30 years ago. Animal species populations saw an overall decline of 60% worldwide between 1970 and 2014 due to habitat loss, pollution, climate change, and other factors. Sometimes I misspeak. 19 of the 20 warmest years on record have occurred since 2001. Today's average American generates about 4.5 pounds of trash per day, compared to 2.68 pounds in 1960. Earth stores 90% of the extra energy in the oceans. Warmer winter and spring temperatures are projected to lead to earlier annual onset of Lyme disease cases in the eastern United States. 80% of the people that are displaced by climate change are women. Nearly 80% of all plastic waste ever created by humans is still in the environment. Presently, 10% of land area on Earth is covered with glacial ice, including glaciers, ice caps, and the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. More than 30 countries and regions have introduced bans on disposable plastic bags to fight plastic waste. If all land ice melted, sea levels would rise approximately 240 to 260 feet worldwide. Heat waves are now 30 times more likely due to climate change. In the past 25 years, forests have shrunk by 502,000 square miles, an area bigger than the size of South Africa. We could potentially avoid 150 million excess premature deaths by the end of the century from air pollution, which is the equivalent of 25 Holocausts or twice the number of deaths from World War II, if we could limit average global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, or hold warming to 2 degrees without relying on negative emissions. 85 to 90% of all wildfires are started by humans. From January 1st to December 4th, 2020, there were 52,934 wildfires. About 9.5 million acres were burned in the 2020 period, compared with just 4.7 million acres in 2019. Sea surface temperature has been consistently higher during the past 3 decades than at any other time since reliable observations began in 1880. 9 of the top 10 years for extreme one-day precipitation events have occurred since 1990. Worldwide, net emissions of greenhouse gases from human activities increased by 35% from 1990 to 2010. More than 500 global companies have committed to set climate goals based on the best available science. Global fossil CO2 emissions rose 62% between 1990 and 2019. By 2050, the number of people at risk for floods will increase from its current level of 1.2 billion to 1.6 billion. 2019 was the second highest on record. 2019 was the second hottest year on record. Only 2016 was hotter, and that was due to El Nino. We're currently on track to beat that record in 2020. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is not impossible, but net human-caused emissions of CO2 would need to fall by about 45% from 2010 levels by the year 2030, and we need to reach net zero by 2050. 420 million fewer people will be exposed to severe heat waves, some tropical coral reefs might survive, and there will be fewer losses of plants and animal species if we limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to 2 degrees Celsius. Every single Sunday, the United States wastes nearly 90% of all the recyclable newspapers. This wastes about 500,000 trees. Today, 95% of plastic packaging material with a $120 billion annual equivalent is lost after its first use. Global greenhouse gas emissions need to fall by 7.6% each year over the next decade if the world is to get back on track towards the goal of limiting temperature rises to close to 1.5 degrees Celsius. G20 nations account for 78% of all emissions. Exposure to air pollution causes 7 million deaths worldwide every year and costs an estimated $5.1 trillion in welfare losses globally. Meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement could save about 1 million lives a year worldwide by 2050 through reductions in air pollution alone. Bold climate action could deliver $26 trillion in economic benefits through 2030. Switching to a clean economy could lead to over 65 million new low-carbon jobs. Regarding the Australia wildfires this year, nearly 50 threatened species are believed to have had more than 80% of their land affected, including 7 critically endangered plants. Only 1% of China's citizens breathe air that's considered safe by the EU. Globally, it's estimated that around 40% of waste is openly burned, and that's practiced in 166 out of 193 countries, leading to an increase in air pollution. An estimated 5.2 trillion plastic particles are currently floating in the world's oceans. $13 billion is lost per year from marine plastic debris, causing a negative impact on marine ecosystems. Plastic has been found at the bottom of the world's deepest ocean trench, the Mariana Trench, and near the peak of Mount Everest, the lowest and highest points on Earth. Less than 1% of used clothing is recycled into new garments. 500,000 tons of plastic microfibers from the fashion industry are dumped into the ocean every year. 87% of the total fiber used for clothing is either thrown away or incinerated. The fashion industry is responsible for 10% of annual global carbon emissions. A shirt made from organic cotton uses 62% less energy, 91% less water, and has a 46% smaller carbon footprint versus a shirt made from regular cotton. During the most severe climate events, barley crop yields could drop by as much as 17%. An estimated 1/3 of all the food produced in the world goes to waste. About 11% of all the greenhouse gas emissions that come from the food system could be reduced if we stopped wasting food. The production of lost or wasted food generates the equivalent of 37 million cars worth of greenhouse gas emissions. If food waste were a physical country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind China and the United States. If our reliance on plastic persists, plastics will account for 20% of all oil consumption by 2050. If plastics production and incineration increase as expected, greenhouse gas emissions will increase to 49 million metric tons by 2030 and 91 million metric tons by 2050. The green technology and sustainability market size was valued at $6.85 billion in 2018, and it's projected to reach $44.6 billion by 2026. 173,000 terawatts of solar energy strikes the Earth continuously. That's more than 10,000 times the world's total energy use. The first silicon solar cell, the precursor of all solar power devices, was built by Bell Laboratories in 1954. The amount of solar power installed in the U.S. has increased more than 23 times over the past 8 years. Since 2008, the price of a solar system has dropped by 80% and is expected to keep falling. 1 in 5 Australian households now use solar energy. 1 wind turbine can produce enough electricity to power up to 300 homes. Every U.S. dollar invested in climate change restoration generates about 10 times that amount in benefits. If it could be properly harnessed, there's enough sunlight that falls on the Earth in just 1 hour to meet the world energy demands for an entire year. If every person in the world lived the same lifestyle as Americans, it would take 5 Earths to provide everyone with enough resources. Humans are causing changes to the climate in just a few decades that would normally take hundreds of thousands of years to occur naturally. Just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions that have occurred since 1988. If you spread all of the Earth's history over one calendar year, humans have only existed for the last 24 minutes of December 31st. But in that time, we've used 33% of the planet's entire natural resources in just the last 0.02 seconds. Dozens of species of plants and animals are going extinct every single day, which is almost 1,000 times the natural rate. Scientists project that by 2050, 30 to 50% of all species will have disappeared. The top layers of the ocean are now absorbing about 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year. Only 0.7% of the world's forests are coastal mangroves. Coastal mangroves store up to 10 times as much carbon as tropical forests. At current rates, we can expect them to disappear completely within the next century, which will release large amounts of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Between January 1st, 2020 and September 25th, 2020, almost 1 billion tons of food was wasted, and 3.7 trillion plastic bags were produced. When the United States recycling levels reach 75%, it will generate 1.5 million new jobs in the U.S. It's estimated that one child uses about 8,000 diapers. The world's population is growing by over 200,000 people every single day. There is very little chance that polar bears would persist anywhere in the world by 2100, except perhaps in the very high Arctic in one small subpopulation, if greenhouse gas emissions continue with business as usual levels. On an intensity basis, U.S. emissions are roughly 50% higher than the European Union's or Japan's, and on a per capita basis, U.S. emissions are roughly twice as high as those of the EU and Japan, and 5 times the world average. This next one's a little lengthy, hold on. Death Valley hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit this August, which is the hottest recorded temperature ever reliably recorded on Earth. Death Valley claims the record for the hottest temperature ever recorded was in 1913 at 134 degrees, but a 2016 analysis by the extreme weather expert Christopher Burt found that the reading did not align with other observations made in the region, concluding that it was not possible from a meteorological perspective, making this 130 degrees in August the hottest reliable temperature ever recorded on Earth. A 2018 study published in PNAS found that since the dawn of human civilization, 83% of wild mammals, 80% of marine mammals, 50% of plants, and 15% of fish have vanished. Researchers have coined the term eco-anxiety to describe chronic or severe anxiety related to human relationships with the environment. Half of all amphibians are at risk of extinction due to climate change. 56 million acres of land is used to feed farmed animals, while only 4 million acres of land is used to feed humans. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Nestle have been named the top plastic polluters in the world for the 3rd year in a row. The Meatless Impossible Burger has an 89% smaller footprint than a standard burger. The total number of tropical storms that were named this season has broken the all-time record set in 2005. In 2020, there were a remarkable 10 hurricanes that rapidly intensified: Hannah, Laura, Sally, Teddy, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, Zeta, Eta, and Iota, some of which underwent explosive intensification, and 2 hurricanes that practically stopped moving as they made landfall: Sally on the Gulf Coast and Eta in Central America. This has been linked to climate change. The length of the hurricane season increases by about 40 days per degree Celsius of warming. 2020 saw its 5th consecutive above normal season for hurricanes, breaking an all-time record. 12 tropical storms and hurricanes hit the United States coastline. The previous record was 9. Tropical cyclones are about 25% more likely to be at major hurricane intensity now than 4 decades ago. Over the United States, hurricane forward speed has decreased more than 15% since 1900, which increases local rainfall flooding substantially. The chances of rapid intensification for hurricanes in the 1980s was about 1 in 100 in the Atlantic. Now the chances are 1 in 20, which is a factor of 5 increase. Iota, that hit Nicaragua this year, is considered the strongest hurricane in history to hit the country. Exxon was aware of climate change as early as 1957, when a paper was written by scientists working at Humble Oil, which is now ExxonMobil, linking fossil fuel use and rising CO2. Exxon also helped to prevent the United States from signing the International Treaty on Climate known as the Kyoto Protocol in 1998 to control greenhouse gases. The top 3 oil consumers, the United States at 20%, China at 13%, and India at 5%, account for more than a third of the world's consumption of oil. In 2016, $5.8 billion worth of oil was consumed every day. $18 trillion worth of oil was consumed in 2018 alone. The International Energy Agency says that solar is now the cheapest form of electricity in history. Giant oil spills account for just 12% of the oil in our oceans. 3 times as much oil is carried out to sea via runoff from our roads, rivers, and drain pipes. 17.6 billion pounds of plastic are dumped into the ocean every year. By 2050, ocean plastic will outweigh all of the ocean's fish. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch includes an estimated 1.8 trillion pieces of trash, and it covers an area twice the size of Texas. With each load of laundry, more than 700,000 synthetic microfibers are washed into our waterways. In 2008, scientists counted 405 hypoxic zones, which are areas of such low oxygen concentration that animal life suffocates and dies in the world's oceans. Ocean acidification makes it more difficult for bivalves such as mussels, clams, and oysters to form shells, decreasing their likelihood of survival, upsetting the food chain, and impacting the multi-billion-dollar shellfish industry. There are 5 giant garbage patches around the world in the oceans, with the Pacific garbage patch being the largest. 80% of plastic pollution comes from just 20 countries. There's enough trash in the ocean to cover every foot of coastline around the world, with 5 full trash bags of plastic. Ocean pollutions kill more than 1 million seabirds each year. Over 100,000 marine animals die every year from plastic entanglement and ingestion. Approximately every square mile of ocean has more than 45,000 pieces of plastic floating in it. In some of the most heavily polluted sections of the ocean, plastic outweighs plankton by 6 times. There's enough plastic in the ocean to circle the Earth 400 times. Cars emit around 24 pounds of carbon dioxide and other global warming gases for every gallon of gas. The global tourism industry is responsible for 8% of global emissions. A study has found that frequent flyers representing just 1% of the global population caused half of the aviation industry's carbon emissions in 2018. Airlines also produced 1 billion tons of CO2, and they benefited from a $100 billion subsidy by not paying for the climate change damage that they caused. The 2012 rule requiring automakers to produce more fuel-efficient and less polluting vehicles was severely weakened in March 2020 by the federal government. Cumulative greenhouse gas emissions between 2021 and 2035 will increase by 654 million metric tons, which is the equivalent of adding another 140 million cars to the road for 1 year every year if this is kept in place. Of the nearly 200 nations that signed the Paris Climate Agreement, the United States is the only one to walk away from its promises to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Every day, about 200,000 acres of rainforest, an area nearly 14 times the size of Manhattan, are burned around the world. If we planted 500 billion trees, we could capture about 205 gigatons of carbon, reducing atmospheric carbon by about 25%. According to IPCC, crop yield declines of 10 to 25% may be widespread by 2050 due to climate change. That was fact number 150. We are halfway through. I'm just going to keep plowing through these. Rising temperatures are predicted to reduce catches of the world's main fish species by 40%. Climate change can transfer risks of foodborne diseases from one region to another, threatening public health. The global cost of food wastage equals $2.6 trillion a year, which includes $700 billion for environmental costs and $900 billion for social costs. It takes up to 1,800 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of meat. Every 6 seconds, an acre of rainforest is cut down for cattle farming. It takes more than 11 times as much fossil fuel to make 1 calorie from animal protein as it does to make 1 calorie from plant protein. If every American skipped just 1 meal of chicken per week and ate vegan food instead, it would be like taking 500,000 cars off of the road. Climate change could directly cost the world economy $7.9 trillion by mid-century as increased drought, flooding, and crop failures hamper growth and threaten infrastructure. Roughly 60% of new diseases come from animals, and roughly 1/3 of those can be directly attributed to changes in human land use, deforestation, the introduction of farming, and development and resource extraction. Higher temperatures and more extreme, less predictable weather conditions are projected to affect availability and distribution of rainfall, snowmelt, river flows, and groundwater, and further deteriorate water quality. As of 2019, 12% of the world population drinks water from unimproved and unsafe sources. By 2050, this number will increase to 2.7 to 3.2 billion people who will live in potentially severely water-scarce areas. It is estimated that by 2040, 1 in 4 of the world's children under 18, some 600 million in all, will be living in areas of extremely high water stress. In the High Plains Aquifer, the largest aquifer in the United States, the rate of water withdrawal is nearly 10 times the rate of natural recharge, threatening the productivity of a key agricultural region. Higher temperatures in the oceans have caused blooms of toxic algae to produce the neurotoxin domoic acid, which makes Dungeness crab and other shellfish unsafe to eat. The Dungeness crab industry had to shut down in 2015 because of this problem, costing the industry more than $48.3 million. Almost 24 commercial-scale carbon capture projects are operating around the world, with 22 more in development. Organic food waste does not decompose in the dark, low-oxygen conditions of landfills. Instead, its degradation process produces methane. Denmark was ranked the most environmentally friendly country in the world by the Environmental Performance Index in 2020. There is only a 1 in 500,000 chance that Australia would be experiencing their current oppressive spring heat without the aid of man-made climate change. I have to cut because my camera... I'll be back in 1 second. The number of heatwave days may increase by 4 to 34 days per season for every 1 degree Celsius of increased global warming. Researchers found that by mid-century in the U.S., days with 105-degree heat index temperatures will triple. By 2085, there may be more than 40 days each year with heat index temperatures in Wisconsin of 100 degrees plus. In general, cities' climates will shift 600 miles southward by mid-century due to climate change. By 2050, Minneapolis's warmest month will increase from 80 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 plus degrees Fahrenheit. Dallas, Texas currently has just a few days above 105 degrees Fahrenheit per year, but by 2050, that number is expected to jump to nearly 30, and by 2100, it may be 60 or more days a year. In 49 large U.S. cities alone, changes in extreme temperatures are projected to result in more than 9,000 additional premature deaths by the end of the century, in a business-as-usual emissions scenario. Almost half of the world's land mammals, not including bats, and nearly a quarter of the birds have already had their habitats hit hard by global warming. Every single year, 300 to 400 million tons of heavy metals, solvents, and toxic sludge are dumped into the world's waters. The number of invasive alien species per country has risen 70% since 1970. If the world warms another zero point 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit, which the UN report says is likely, coral reefs will dwindle by 70% to 90%. At 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, 99% of the world's coral will be in trouble. More than 40% of the world's amphibian species, more than 1/3 of the marine mammals, and nearly 1/3 of sharks and fish are threatened with extinction. The IUCN calculated in March that 27,159 species are threatened, endangered, or extinct in the wild out of nearly 100,000 species that biologists examined in depth. Of the 18 measured ways that nature helps humans, 14 of them are declining, with food and energy production noticeable exceptions. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services reports that 15.5 million miles of new roads will be paved over nature between now and 2050. The World Wildlife Fund scientists have estimated that most species on the planet, including plants, will have to move faster than 1,000 meters per year if they're to keep within the climate zone which they need for survival. 1 in 3 plant, insect, and animal species could face extinction by 2070. However, things could be worse if emissions continue to rise as rapidly as they have in the recent decades. In a worst-case scenario, that number could rise to over 55%, facing extinction by 2070. Scientists estimate that between 150 to 200 species of plant, insect, bird, and mammal have become extinct every 24 hours as ecosystems unravel. Severe turbulence when flying is likely to dramatically increase by up to 149% as a result of stronger wind shears within the Earth's jet streams due to climate change. As global temperatures continue to rise, we can also expect more active thunderstorms. As glaciers melt due to rising temperatures, the pressure on the Earth's mantle decreases, which in turn increases magma amounts while reducing stress on a volcano's magma chambers. This leads to higher volcanic activity. There is a direct link between warmer climates and higher levels of impulsive behavior and even violence. Pollen counts are likely to double over the next 3 decades in the United States due to increasing temperatures. As nutrients become more scarce due to rising temperatures and drought, larger animals struggle more than their smaller counterparts to fulfill their nutritional needs, which means that many species may start to shrink in size. If desert soil becomes more prone to erosion, it would not be fertile enough to support plants and feed animals. Sorry, I botched that one a little bit. Even a 65 centimeter rise in sea level would swallow around 40% of Bangladesh's productive land. 470 million to 760 million people across the globe could lose their land to rising seas if global warming is allowed to continue at the current rate. People in warmer environments are also biologically unable to dispense of their blood sugar efficiently. So, for each degree of warming, an extra 100,000 Americans per year will get type 2 diabetes. Mosquitoes carrying viruses will reach higher latitudes as temperatures increase due to climate change. At present, there are approximately 7,000 sites around Siberia where the soil is legitimately bouncy due to microbes producing methane underneath all that frozen soil. That was fact 200. We are 2/3 of the way there. Thank you for sticking with me so far if you have. I'm going to just keep going. Many of the world's prime wine growing regions could shrink dramatically due to human-caused climate change. If the global temperature rises by 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100, the regions of the world that are suitable for growing wine grapes could shrink by as much as 56%. The quality of many of the world's most popular wines will be affected due to rising temperatures. The price of beer could potentially double as barley yields are directly affected by climate change. The lack of cool weather in the late summer and fall confuses a cranberry's ripening process, which delays the arrival of the cranberry red tint that makes the berries so appealing to buyers. Growers now have to wait for that color to develop, which makes the season longer than it used to be. Excuse me. Going carless for a year could save about 2.6 tons of carbon dioxide. Eating only locally grown food for 1 year could save the greenhouse gas equivalent of driving 1,000 miles. In the average American home, 25% of energy is used to heat spaces, 13% is used to heat water, 11% for cooling, and the remainder is spent on appliances. LED lights use up to 85% less energy, they last up to 25 times longer, and they're cheaper to run than incandescent lights. But there are about 2 billion sockets in the United States that still have an energy-wasting bulb in them. 20 items of clothing are manufactured per person per year. Doing 2 loads of laundry weekly in cold water instead of hot or warm water can save up to 500 pounds of carbon dioxide each year. Skipping the dryer can reduce your carbon footprint of clothing by as much as 33%. Vampire power, which is when you have appliances plugged in that you're not using, costs more than $19 billion in the US alone. 6.5 million trees are cut down each year to make paper coffee cups. 2/3 of the U.S. adults say that federal government is doing too little to reduce the effects of global climate change. Almost 70% of Americans say that they wouldn't pay even $10 a month to help cool the warming planet. An estimated 30 million trees are cut down just to produce gift wrap, and it's difficult to recycle due to the dyes and glitters that are used. In the United States, an additional 5 million tons of waste is generated during the holidays. 4 million tons of this wrapping paper and shopping bags. In the UK, around 100 million rolls of gift wrapping paper are thrown away after Christmas. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent than CO2, but it's produced in lower quantities than CO2 and stays in the atmosphere for only 114 years compared to CO2, which remains for up to 1,000 years. Livestock accounts for 14% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change could cost the developed world up to 10% of its GDP per year. Researchers have analyzed results from 40 different climate models, and in most of them, the Arctic sea ice was reduced to a level that they described as practically sea ice free before mid-century. Around 2.4% of global CO2 emissions come from aviation. Together with other gases, the water vapor trails produced by aircraft, the industry is responsible for around 5% of global warming. Mile for mile, flying is the most damaging way to travel for the climate. A return flight from London to Berlin emits around 3 times the emissions saved from a year of recycling. Emissions from planes have increased by 32% between 2013 and 2018. Fuel efficiency improvements for aviation are only on the order of 1% per year, while flights are increasing by 6% per year. A single passenger traveling on a domestic flight can lead to climate impacts equivalent to 254 grams of CO2 for every kilometer, while an intercity train is 41 grams for every passenger mile, and traveling by coach is just 28 grams of CO2 per mile. A first-class ticket on a long-haul flight emits, on average, 4 times as much as an economy seat. This is because more expensive seats take up more space and weight on the plane. And also, first and business class tend to end up with more empty seats. Europe's breeding bird populations have shifted an average of 1 kilometer north every year for the past 3 decades due to climate change. Mediterranean bird species such as the European bee-eater, the little egret, are now reaching the UK, France, and the Netherlands, mainly due to mild winters. Farmland birds are suffering overall declines in population because agricultural intensification means that there's less food and residue from harvesting. The UK's farmland birds have declined by 55% since 1970. 40.1 billion tons of CO2 were pumped into the atmosphere in 2019. CO2 emissions dropped by 7% in 2020 because of lockdowns due to the coronavirus. Palm oil expansion could affect 54% of threatened mammals and 64% of threatened birds globally. It takes approximately 2,900 gallons of water to make one pair of jeans. That's about 70 bathtubs full. The average person who has periods will use up to 12,000 disposable period products over the course of a lifetime. A tampon takes 500 years to decompose. Old-fashioned incandescent bulbs release 90% of their energy as heat, so only 10% of that energy is actually going towards creating the light. The average washing machine uses 13,500 gallons of water per year, which is about as much water as you will drink in your entire lifetime. The United States alone produces 3,000 tons of paper towel waste per day. We generate around 40 million tons of electronic waste every year worldwide. Recycling 1 million laptops saves the energy equivalent to the electricity used by more than 3,500 U.S. homes in a year. For every million cell phones that we recycle, 35,000 pounds of copper, 772 pounds of silver, 75 pounds of gold, and 33 pounds of palladium can be recovered. Monarch butterfly populations in California have fallen by as much as 95% since the 1980s due to habitat loss, increasing use of pesticides, and loss of milkweed populations, all related to climate change caused by humans. Over 11,000 flying foxes died in an extreme heat wave in Australia in November 2019. Up to 80% of mammals and 86% of birds are at risk of local extinction in the Miombo woodlands in southern Africa. The Amazon could lose 69% of its plant species due to climate change. Staghorn coral has declined by up to 98% in parts of the Caribbean since the 1980s. Since 2005, the Caribbean region has lost 50% of its corals. There is a red Hawaiian seaweed that can reduce methane emissions in cows by 90% when it's added to their feed. The UK can anticipate having 4 times as much emissions-free electricity in 2050 as today if current rates of renewable expansion continue. Using recycled aluminum instead of virgin materials decreases water and air pollution and energy use by 95%. You can make 20 cans out of recycled material with the same amount of energy it takes to make one new one. Americans throw away over 11 million tons of glass bottles and jars each year. Recycling one glass bottle saves enough energy to light a 100 light bulb for 4 hours. Every year, we throw away 2.5 million plastic bottles. Every ton of steel that is recycled saves 2,500 pounds of iron ore, 1,400 pounds of coal, and 120 pounds of limestone. Enough energy is saved each year by recycling steel to supply Los Angeles with electricity for almost 10 years. One tree can filter up to 60 pounds of pollutants from the air each year. Americans use more than 67 million tons of paper per year, or 580 pounds per person. Americans receive 4.5 million tons of junk mail per year, and 44% of it is never even opened. Every person in the U.S. receives the equivalent of 1.5 trees per year, or approximately 560 pieces of junk mail. The average household throws away 13,000 separate pieces of paper each year. U.S. recycling levels are currently just 21.4%. When U.S. recycling levels reach 75%, it will be the environmental and CO2 equivalent of removing 55 million cars from the U.S. roads each year. Making one single disposable diaper takes 144 gallons of water. The average person has the opportunity to recycle more than 25,000 cans in a lifetime. Americans throw away enough office paper each year to build a 12-foot high wall from Seattle to New York every single year. Recycling 1 ton of cardboard saves 46 gallons of oil. Approximately 3,000 pounds of food is wasted per second in the United States. Climate change is causing the rapid spread of the deadly fungus Batrachochytrium dendrochronicum Batitis, which is endangering amphibians worldwide. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Sand temperature determines the gender of developing young sea turtles. Warmer eggs turn into females, cooler eggs turn into males. Under climate change, turtle sex ratios are likely to become skewed, resulting in population decrease. Increasing carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are decreasing the nutritional value of the eucalyptus leaves, resulting in koala malnutrition and starvation. Koalas are also increasingly being forced to descend from trees in search of water and new habitats during dry conditions, which is exposing them to predators and road traffic. Early sea ice breakup is causing nursing ringed seal pups to be prematurely separated from their mothers. Between 1998 and 2014, Exxon gave over $30 million to well-known climate change denier groups. The largest 5 stock market listed oil and gas companies spend nearly $200 million a year lobbying to delay, control, or block policies to tackle climate change. In June 2020, Minnesota's Attorney General sued ExxonMobil, among others, for launching a campaign of deception which deliberately tried to undermine the science supporting global warming. In the mid-1980s, Chevron commissioned a series of expensive television and print ads to broadcast its environmental dedication, while it was at the same time actively violating the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, as well as spilling oil into wildlife refuges. Commercial nuclear power plants have supplied around 20% of the nation's electricity each year since 1990. The number of Americans working in the clean energy industry outnumbers fossil fuel workers by 3 to 1. Median wages in the renewable energy industry are 8 to 19% higher than the economy average. In Iceland, almost 100% of energy is being supplied by hydropower and geothermal sources. Rainfall in Norway has increased by 20% during the last 100 years, and the rainfall has become more intense. Cities are responsible for 75% of global CO2 emissions, with transport and building being among the largest contributors. The Aptera car that came out this year is the world's first never-charge electric vehicle that's almost fully powered by the sun and requires no electric charging. It uses 70% less energy than the average electric car to drive the same distance. Humans have influenced 68% of all extreme weather conditions in the last 20 years. Just 1% of trees in the Amazon can store up to 50% of the region's carbon emissions. By 2035, the U.S. Geological Survey projects that some of the Marshall Islands will be submerged. Others will no longer have drinking water because their aquifers will be contaminated with salt water. As a result, residents would be forced to migrate away from their homelands without extreme, large-scale adaptation. Wildlife population sizes have dropped by 68% between 1970 to 2018. By 2050, disease-carrying mosquitoes will ultimately reach 500 million more people than they do today, including some 55 million more Americans. The world's volcanoes, both on land and undersea, generate about 200 million tons of CO2 annually, while our automotive and industrial activities cause 24 billion tons of CO2 each year worldwide. 200 million versus 24 billion. Greenhouse gas emissions from volcanoes comprise less than 1% of those generated by today's human endeavors. Food accounts for 10 to 30% of a household's carbon footprint due to the emissions involved in food production and transportation. Approximately 1.3 million Joshua trees that were thousands of years old in the Mojave National Preserve were burned in August's Dome Fire. Fact number 300, and then I have one more bonus fact. Since 1750, the warming driven by greenhouse gases from our burning of fossil fuels is over 50 times greater than the slight extra warming coming from the sun itself over the same time interval. And for the bonus fact, the gold standard for certainty was hit in 2019 when a study concluded that there is a 99.9999% chance that humans are the cause of global warming. that means that there is a literal 1 in a million chance that humans are not the cause of the current climate change crisis that we are experiencing. That was 300 climate change facts. If you made it through this whole video, thank you for sticking with me. I tried to make some pauses so that you could soak in those facts. A lot of them are so heavy. But anyway, that was 300 climate change facts. Thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share this channel with your friends and your family so that we can get more money for the people who need it through our climate relief efforts. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.